She dropped her dress in front of everyone, and in that single moment, she didn't just own the room, she changed my life forever. Jake had been working at the Manhattan Art Gallery for 3 years, and honestly, most days felt pretty ordinary. He'd show up, help hang paintings, talk to visitors about the artists, and go home. Nothing too exciting. But then one Tuesday afternoon, his boss called him into her office with this look on her face that made his stomach flip. "I need you to coordinate the charity gala next month," she said, sliding an elegant cream-colored invitation across her desk. Jake picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just any event. This was the event. The kind of night where millionaires wrote checks with more zeros than Jake's annual salary, where famous faces mingled under chandeliers that probably cost more than his car. He'd heard stories about these galas, how they could make or break careers, how one wrong move, one poorly placed sculpture, one bad lighting choice could become gossip that traveled through the art world faster than wildfire. And now it was his responsibility to make sure everything was perfect. The gala was being organized in partnership with Elena Rodriguez, a name that carried serious weight in the city's cultural circles. She was a self-made success story. Someone who'd arrived in America with barely anything and built an empire through sheer determination and an eye for transformative art. People respected her. Some feared her. Everyone wanted to impress her. Jake spent the next few weeks buried in preparation. He visited studios across the city, meeting artists who poured their hearts into their work. He listened to their stories, understood their struggles, felt the emotion behind every brushstroke and sculpture. He wasn't just selecting art for a fancy party. He was choosing pieces that told real stories about real people overcoming real challenges. Late nights became his new normal. He'd sit in the gallery after everyone left, adjusting lighting, repositioning pieces, stepping back to see how everything flowed together. His girlfriend complained he was never home. His friends stopped inviting him out because they knew he'd say no. But something inside him knew this opportunity mattered. This could change everything. The week before the gala, Jake barely slept. He kept having these dreams where everything went wrong. The art fell off the walls. The lights exploded. Important guests walked out in disgust. He'd wake up sweating, reaching for his phone to triple-check his notes and schedules. His mom called him the day before the event. "You sound exhausted, honey," she said with that worried tone mothers have perfected over generations. "Remember, you're good at what you do. Trust yourself," easy for her to say. She wasn't the one whose entire career could crash and burn if tomorrow night went sideways. The morning of the gala, Jake arrived at the venue before sunrise. The space looked magical in the early light streaming through the tall windows. He walked through slowly, checking every detail one more time. The paintings hung exactly right. The sculptures caught the light perfectly. The information cards were positioned just so. Everything was ready. Now he just had to survive the actual event. As evening approached, Jake changed into his one good suit. It was a few years old, a little tight around the shoulders, but it would have to do. He straightened his tie in the bathroom mirror, gave himself a pep talk that felt ridiculous even as he said it, and headed back to the main gallery space. Staff members rushed around making final preparations. Caterers arranged champagne flutes in perfect rows. Musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. The energy in the room crackled with anticipation. Guests started arriving around 7. Jake positioned himself near the art display, ready to answer questions, ready to explain the vision behind the collection. He watched well-dressed people flow through the doors, their jewelry catching the light, their confident laughter filling the space. These were people who belonged in rooms like this. Jake still sometimes felt like an outsider looking in. Then the room went quiet. Not completely silent, but that noticeable shift when something important is about to happen. Jake looked toward the entrance and saw her. Elena Rodriguez stood at the top of the grand staircase, and the woman was absolutely stunning. She wore this flowing black dress that seemed to shimmer with every tiny movement. And she carried herself like someone who'd never doubted her place in any room she entered. Jake's mouth went dry. He'd seen photos, of course, but they didn't capture the actual presence of this woman. She began descending the stairs, and every eye in the room followed her. People parted without even realizing they were doing it, creating a path through the crowd. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The woman whose approval could launch his career into the stratosphere was about to see his work. What if she hated it? What if she thought his selections were amateur or boring or completely missed the point? Elena moved through the gallery with purpose, pausing occasionally to greet someone or admire a piece of art. She was getting closer to his display. Closer. Closer. And then her eyes locked onto his. Jake forgot how to breathe. She walked directly toward him, her gaze never wavering, and he felt like she could see straight through him, see all his doubts and fears and the fact that he still felt like a kid playing dress-up in the grown-up world. She stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could see the intelligence dancing in her eyes, the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And then she did something completely unexpected. Elena reached up and slowly removed the elegant wrap that had been draped across her shoulders. Jake stood frozen, his brain trying to process what was happening. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. What was she doing? Why was everyone staring? Why did he feel like time had slowed down to an impossible crawl? She reached behind her neck and Jake heard the soft sound of a zipper. His face went hot. His mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them making sense. Was this some kind of test? A statement? Had he somehow offended her without realizing it? But then he saw it. As the black dress fell away, there was another complete outfit underneath. Not underwear, not anything inappropriate. It was this incredible avant-garde ensemble that looked like wearable art itself. The fabric seemed to shift colors as she moved, incorporating elements of painting and sculpture into actual clothing. It was one of the pieces from his exhibition, brought to life in a way he'd never imagined possible. The room erupted, not in scandal but in amazed applause and excited whispers. Jake's knees felt weak with relief. This wasn't a disaster. This was brilliant. Elena had transformed herself into a living extension of the art he'd curated. She'd made his exhibition the centerpiece of the entire gala in one bold, fearless moment. She looked directly at him as the outer dress pooled at her feet, and Jake understood something profound in that instant. This wasn't about shock value or attention-seeking. This was about showing everyone in that room that art wasn't meant to sit safely on walls. It was meant to challenge people, to make them feel something real and immediate and impossible to ignore. Elena smiled at him, a genuine warm smile that completely contradicted her commanding public image. She gestured toward the artwork surrounding them, inviting the crowd to look closer to really see what Jake had assembled. People surged forward, their interest suddenly laser-focused on the exhibition he'd spent weeks perfecting. For the next hour, the gala centered around the art display. Guests who might have otherwise spent the evening in polite small talk now engaged in passionate discussions about the pieces. They asked questions about the artists. They debated the meanings behind different works. They pulled out their phones to take photos and share them on social media. Jake found himself swept into conversation after conversation. A tech billionaire wanted to know about the sculptor whose work explored themes of displacement. A famous actress couldn't stop talking about a painting that reminded her of her grandmother's stories about immigrating to America. A museum director asked for contact information for 3 different artists, mentioning possible future exhibitions. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Jake had dreamed about moments like this, but the reality felt different than his imagination. More intense, more real. The stakes suddenly seemed higher because success wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was happening right in front of him. Around 9 o'clock, as the energy in the room hit its peak, Elena appeared beside him again. She'd put on a simple jacket over the artistic ensemble, making her look slightly less like a walking sculpture but no less impressive. "Walk with me," she said quietly, and it wasn't really a request. Jake followed her to a quieter corner of the gallery, away from the crowds and the noise. His mind still raced from everything that had happened. He wanted to thank her, to tell her how incredible her entrance had been, but words seemed inadequate. "You're Jake," she said, settling into a comfortable position against the wall. Again, it wasn't a question. She knew exactly who he was. "Yes, ma'am," he managed, then immediately regretted the formal address. It made him sound like a nervous teenager. She laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Please don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel ancient. Elena is fine." "Okay, Elena, what you did out there was incredible. I don't even know how to—" She held up a hand, stopping him. "I've been following your work for almost 6 months now. The small exhibition you did in Brooklyn last spring? I was there. The curation you did for that emerging artist showcase? Brilliant. You see art differently than most people in this business. You understand that it's not about price tags or prestige. It's about connection. About truth. Jake felt his face flush with pride and embarrassment. Elena Rodriguez had been watching his work? Coming to his small exhibitions? It seemed impossible. I wanted tonight to mean something, she continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Too many of these galas are just social performances. Rich people writing checks so they can feel good about themselves. I wanted to remind everyone why art actually matters. She gestured back toward the main room where the party continued. Every single piece you selected tells a story about resilience. About people who faced impossible odds and found ways to transform their pain into something beautiful. That matters. That's what art should do. They talked for a long time. Elena shared stories about her own journey, and Jake found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He told her about growing up in a small town where nobody understood why he cared so much about paintings and sculptures. About working 3 jobs to pay for his art history degree. About all the times he doubted whether he belonged in this world. Elena listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her attention completely focused on him. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Can I tell you something that took me way too long to learn?" she asked. "The moment I stopped waiting for permission to take up space in a room, everything changed. For years I tried to make myself smaller, less opinionated, more palatable to the people I thought had all the power. And you know what? It got me nowhere." She straightened up, her energy shifting to something more intense. "That moment on the stairs tonight," Elena continued, "I knew exactly what people would think. Some would call it a publicity stunt. Others would say I was being inappropriate or seeking attention. There would be criticism and gossip and probably some think pieces about whether it was empowering or exploitative." Jake nodded, hanging on every word. This woman had just given him the biggest boost of his career, and now she was sharing the mindset behind it. "But here's what I learned," she said, her voice carrying that quiet confidence that comes from hard-won experience. "People are going to have opinions no matter what you do. If you play it safe, they'll call you boring. If you take risks, they'll call you reckless. You literally cannot win by trying to please everyone, so you might as well do what feels true to you." She paused, looking back toward the crowd. "When I was your age, I was terrified all the time. Terrified of making mistakes, terrified of people not taking me seriously. I was an immigrant woman trying to break into a world that didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. Every door I walked through, I felt like I had to prove I deserved to be there." Jake related to that feeling more than he wanted to admit. Even tonight, surrounded by success, part of him still felt like someone might tap him on the shoulder and tell him there'd been a terrible mistake. "The turning point for me came about 12 years ago," Elena said, her eyes getting distant like she was watching a memory play out. "I was at a gallery opening and I'd submitted one of my own pieces for consideration. I was still creating my own art back then, before I shifted to advocacy and curation. The gallery owner barely looked at it, dismissed it in about 30 seconds with some comment about it being too raw for their clientele. I was devastated. I went home and seriously considered giving up entirely. Why was I putting myself through this? Why did I keep trying to force my way into spaces that clearly didn't want me?" Jake leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story. This was Elena Rodriguez, one of the most powerful people in the art world, and she'd felt exactly what he felt. "But then I got angry," she said, a slight smile crossing her face. "Really angry. Not at the gallery owner specifically, but at the whole system that decided whose art mattered and whose didn't. And I thought, you know what? If they won't make space for me, I'll make my own space. And I'll bring everyone else they're overlooking along with me." "That's when you started your foundation," Jake said, remembering the articles he'd read about her philanthropic work. "Exactly. I stopped asking for permission and started creating opportunities. I funded emerging artists. I organized exhibitions that the traditional galleries wouldn't touch. I used every connection and resource I had to amplify voices that weren't being heard." She turned to face him directly. "And tonight? What I did tonight was the same principle. I could have walked in normally, given a nice speech about the importance of supporting the arts, and everyone would have nodded politely and forgotten it by tomorrow. Or I could do something that would make people actually pay attention to the work you put together." Jake felt a lump forming in his throat. The enormity of what she'd done for him was starting to sink in. She'd put her own reputation on the line to shine a spotlight on his curation. "Why?" he asked quietly. Why do all this for me? You don't even know me. Elena's expression softened. I do know you. Maybe not the details of your life, but I know what I see in your work. I know that same hunger I had, that same desire to use art to tell stories that matter. And honestly, the art world needs more people like you. People who actually care about the meaning behind the work, not just the price tag. She checked her watch, a practical gesture that seemed at odds with her otherwise elegant appearance. I need to get back out there, make my rounds, write some checks. But Jake, listen to me. What happened tonight is going to open doors for you. Lots of doors. And it's going to be overwhelming. People are going to want meetings and proposals and 100 different things from you. Jake nodded, already feeling anxious about what came next. My advice? Stay true to what brought you here. Don't let anyone pressure you into compromising your vision just because they're offering money or prestige. The minute you start curating for other people's approval instead of genuine artistic merit, you lose what makes you special. She started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Jake? Stop doubting yourself so much. You earned this moment. Own it. As she disappeared back into the crowd, Jake stood alone for a minute, processing everything. Through the doorway, he could see the gala continuing. People were still clustered around his exhibition, still talking animatedly about the pieces, still taking photos and exchanging contact information. This was really happening. His work was being seen and appreciated by people who could actually make a difference in these artists' careers. The kid who'd grown up in a town where the only art was whatever got hung in the local diner had somehow ended up here, in this moment with one of the most respected figures in the industry vouching for him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jake talked until his throat was hoarse, answered questions until his brain felt fuzzy, and exchanged more business cards than he could count. By the time the last guests filtered out around midnight, he was exhausted but buzzing with an energy that made sleep seem impossible. His boss found him as he was doing a final walkthrough of the space. Jake, she said, shaking her head with an expression somewhere between disbelief and pride. I have no idea how you pulled that off, but you absolutely nailed it. That was the most talked about gala we've ever been part of. Jake smiled, too tired to explain that he hadn't really pulled anything off. Elena had done the heavy lifting. But maybe that was part of the lesson too. Accepting help. Recognizing when someone believed in you enough to put their own reputation on the line. He took the subway home that night, still wearing his slightly too tight suit, and watched his reflection in the dark window. He looked the same as he had that morning, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd glimpsed what was possible when you stopped playing it safe. The next morning, Jake woke up to his phone blowing up with notifications. Social media posts about the gala were everywhere. Photos of Elena's dramatic reveal had been shared thousands of times, but more importantly, people were talking about the art itself, about the stories behind the pieces, about the artists he'd featured. His email inbox was overflowing. Gallery owners wanting to discuss collaborations, collectors asking about purchasing pieces, journalists requesting interviews. It was exactly what Elena had warned him about, overwhelming in its intensity. Jake made coffee and sat down at his tiny kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. This was the moment where everything could either take off or fall apart. How he handled the next few weeks would determine whether last night became the foundation for something bigger, or just a brief flash of success. The weeks following the gala became the most intense period of Jake's life. His calendar filled with meetings and phone calls. Everyone wanted a piece of his time, his attention, his vision. Gallery owners invited him to lunch at expensive restaurants where he felt uncomfortable, even looking at the prices. Collectors asked him to visit their private collections and offer opinions on potential acquisitions. It should have felt like a dream come true, and in many ways it did. But there was also this underlying current of stress that Jake hadn't anticipated. Every decision suddenly felt weighted with importance. What if he made the wrong choice? What if people realized he wasn't as talented as they thought? What if last night had been a fluke? The turning point came about 3 weeks after the gala. Jake was in a meeting with a wealthy real estate developer who wanted him to curate art for a new luxury hotel. The money being discussed was more than Jake made in a year. Life-changing money, the kind of opportunity his younger self would have killed for. But as the developer talked, Jake felt something twisting in his gut. The guy wasn't interested in meaningful art. He wanted pieces that looked expensive, that would impress guests, that would photograph well for Instagram. He kept using phrases like investment potential and on-brand aesthetic while completely ignoring anything about the actual artistic merit. Jake tried to steer the HFY conversation toward artists who could create something genuine, something that told a story. The developer nodded politely but clearly wasn't interested. He wanted names, recognition, pieces he could brag about at cocktail parties. Halfway through the meeting, Jake realized he was compromising the exact thing Elena had warned him about. He was letting someone else's vision override his own because the money was good and saying no felt scary. "I don't think I'm the right person for this project," Jake heard himself say, surprising even himself. The developer blinked, clearly not used to being turned down. "I'm sorry?" "The vision you have is perfectly valid," Jake continued, his heart pounding. "But it's not what I do. I work with art that has meaning, that tells stories about real human experiences. I don't think our approaches are compatible." The developer's face went cold. "You realize what you're turning down here?" "I do," Jake said, standing up and extending his hand. "And I appreciate you thinking of me. But I'd rather build my career on projects I actually believe in." Walking out of that meeting, Jake's hands were shaking. Had he just made a massive mistake? That money could have solved so many problems. Could have given him breathing room and stability. But as he stepped out onto the busy street, taking a deep breath of city air, he felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. He was still thinking about the meeting when his phone rang. Elena's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," he answered, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I heard you just walked away from the Riverside Hotel project," she said without preamble. Jake's stomach dropped. News traveled fast in this world. "Yeah, I did." "Was that stupid?" "Everyone's probably going to think I'm an idiot for turning down that kind of money." Elena laughed. "Jake, I'm calling to tell you how proud I am. That project would have destroyed what makes you special. Trust me, I've seen it happen to too many talented people. They take the big money job, compromise their vision bit by bit, and wake up 5 years later wondering how they became just another corporate art selector." Her words eased some of the anxiety tightening his chest. "It was harder than I thought it would be," saying no, it always is, especially when you're still building your reputation. "But here's what I learned. Every time you say no to something that doesn't align with your values, you make it easier to say yes to the things that do." She paused, and Jake could hear street noise in the background. "Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. Nothing huge, no pressure, but I think you might be interested." "I'm listening," Jake said, curious where this was going. "I'm organizing a smaller exhibition focusing specifically on artists who use their work to explore themes of identity and belonging. It's not going to have the glamour of that gala. The budget is modest, but it's going to be pure, meaningful work, and I'd like you to co-curate it with me." Jake stopped walking, standing still in the middle of the sidewalk while people flowed around him. Work directly with Elena? Learn from her? The opportunity felt impossibly valuable. "I would love that," he said, unable to keep the excitement out of his voice. "Good. Come by my studio tomorrow afternoon. We'll start planning." Over the next few months, Jake learned more about art curation than he had in his entire previous career. Elena didn't just teach him about selecting pieces or arranging exhibitions. She taught him about the business side, the politics, how to navigate difficult personalities and competing interests. But more importantly, she taught him about staying true to himself even when it would be easier to compromise. They'd be reviewing potential pieces, and Elena would constantly ask, "Does this move you? Does it tell a story that matters?" If the answer is no, it doesn't matter how famous the artist is or how much money it might bring in. The exhibition they created together was smaller than the charity gala, held in a converted warehouse space rather than a fancy venue. But the work they showcased was powerful, raw, honest. Artists from diverse backgrounds sharing their experiences through painting, sculpture, photography, and mixed media. Opening night was different from the gala. The crowd was younger, more diverse, more casually dressed. These were people who came for the art itself, not for social networking or tax write-offs. And their reactions were visceral. Jake watched people stand in front of pieces with tears in their eyes, heard conversations about how certain works reminded them of their own struggles or their family's history. This felt right in a way the luxury hotel project never would have. This mattered. As the evening wound down, Elena pulled Jake aside. "You see the difference? she asked, gesturing at the crowd still engaged with the artwork. Yeah, Jake said. These people are actually connecting with the work. They're not just looking at it. They're feeling it. Exactly. And that's what you should chase. Not the biggest paycheck or the most prestigious client, but the moments where art actually does what it's supposed to do, changes how people see the world, even if just for a moment. She smiled at him, and there was something almost maternal in her expression. You're going to be just fine, Jake. You've got the hard part figured out. You know what you stand for. Now you just need to keep standing for it, even when it gets difficult. 6 months after that night at the gala, Jake found himself in a position he'd never imagined possible. He'd been offered his own exhibition space, a small gallery in a neighborhood that was just starting to attract art lovers. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms with decent lighting and some exposed brick walls, but it was his. A place where he could curate exhibitions that mattered to him without having to answer to anyone else. The financial reality was terrifying. The rent was barely manageable. He'd be living off savings for at least the first few months, maybe longer. Every practical voice in his head screamed that this was reckless, that he should take one of the stable positions he'd been offered at established galleries. But Elena's words kept echoing in his mind. Sometimes you have to take up space. Sometimes you have to stop waiting for permission. He signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote his name. The landlord handed him the keys with a shrug that suggested he'd seen plenty of ambitious young people fail at this exact dream. But Jake didn't care. He had a plan. More importantly, he had a vision. The first exhibition he planned was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. He wanted to showcase artists who'd been overlooked by the mainstream art world, people doing incredible work that deserved a platform. He reached out to creators he'd met over the past months, explained his concept, and invited them to be part of something new. The response overwhelmed him. Nearly everyone he contacted said yes. They believed in what he was trying to build. They trusted his vision. That trust felt both empowering and terrifying, because now he absolutely could not let them down. Jake spent weeks preparing the space. He painted walls himself because he couldn't afford to hire help. He borrowed equipment from friends. He designed promotional materials on his laptop at 2 a.m. His girlfriend thought he was losing his mind, pouring everything into this massive risk. Maybe he was, but it felt necessary, like something he had to do or he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Elena stopped by one afternoon while he was hanging pieces. She walked through the space slowly, studying each work carefully. Jake watched her nervously, waiting for feedback. "This is good," she finally said. "Really good. You're not playing it safe, and I respect that." "I'm terrified," Jake admitted. "What if nobody comes? What if the critics hate it? What if—" "Stop," Elena interrupted gently. "You're doing that thing again where you spiral into worst-case scenarios. Yes, maybe nobody comes. Maybe the critics hate it. But maybe it's incredible and launches these artists' careers. Maybe you create something that matters. You won't know unless you actually do it." She walked over to a particularly striking painting, a piece exploring themes of displacement and belonging. Fear is always going to be there, Jake. The question is whether you let it make your decisions for you. From what I can see, you're not doing that anymore. You're scared, but you're doing it anyway. That's courage. Opening night arrived faster than Jake expected and somehow slower than seemed possible. He woke up that morning feeling like he might throw up. This was it, the moment where he'd find out if his vision actually connected with people or if he'd completely misjudged everything. He got to the gallery early, triple-checking that everything was perfect. The lighting, the placement of each piece, the information cards. He'd written personal descriptions for every work, explaining not just what it was, but why it mattered, what story it told. People started arriving around 7. At first just a trickle, friends and fellow artists showing their support, but then more came. Strangers who'd seen the social media posts or the flyers around the neighborhood, people who were genuinely curious about what this new space was offering. Jake positioned himself near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived, but mostly trying to stay out of the way. He wanted to watch how they interacted with the art. Did they stop and really look? Did they read the descriptions? Did anything move them? The gallery filled up more than he'd dared to hope. People clustered around pieces, having animated discussions. He overheard conversations about technique, about meaning, about how certain works resonated with personal experiences. This was exactly what he'd wanted. Real engagement. Real connection. A journalist from a local arts publication came through taking notes and photos. She talked to several of the artists, asking about their inspirations and processes. When she approached Jake, he felt that familiar nervous flutter but pushed through it. "What made you decide to open your own space?" she asked, recorder held between them. Jake thought about how to answer. He could give something safe and professional, or he could be honest. "I wanted to create a place where art that tells important stories could be seen," he said. "Not art that's popular or trendy or whatever wealthy collectors want to buy. Just honest work from people who have something real to say." The journalist smiled. "That's refreshing. Most new gallery owners are very careful about how they position themselves." "I'm probably making a mistake by not being more careful," Jake admitted with a laugh. "But I've learned that trying to be what other people want you to be doesn't really work. You might as well be yourself and find the people who connect with that." Later in the evening, Jake noticed Elena arrive. She'd told him she'd try to come, but hadn't made any promises. She moved through the exhibition slowly, and Jake watched her face carefully for reactions. When she finally approached him, she was smiling. "You did it," she said simply. "Did what?" "Found your voice. This exhibition isn't trying to be anything other than what it is. It's honest. It's vulnerable. It's exactly what the art world needs more of." Jake felt emotion welling up in his throat. "I couldn't have gotten here without that night at the gala. Without you taking that risk." Elena shook her head. "I didn't create this. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built something meaningful on the other side. That moment at the gala, that was about showing you that taking risks doesn't have to end in disaster. Sometimes it ends in something beautiful." They stood together, watching people engage with the art. A teenager stood transfixed in front of a sculpture. An older couple debated the meaning of a photography series. A group of friends took selfies in front of a colorful mural-style piece. "Can I tell you something?" Elena asked. "That night when I dropped my dress, I was absolutely terrified. I knew it would be controversial. I knew some people would judge me harshly, but I also knew it was the right move to make people actually pay attention. And standing there looking you in the eyes, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at that age. That hunger, that belief that art could matter if we just gave it a chance. I still feel like I'm faking it half the time," Jake confessed. "Like someone's going to realize I don't actually know what I'm doing." Elena laughed. "That never completely goes away, but it gets easier to ignore. You learn to trust your instincts, to believe in your own taste and judgment." She checked her watch. "I need to head out, but Jake, this is just the beginning for you. Keep doing work that means something. Keep giving platforms to artists who deserve them. Don't let success, if it comes, make you forget why you started." After she left, Jake continued watching the crowd. The exhibition would run for 6 weeks. He had no idea if it would be financially successful, or if he'd be scrambling to make next month's rent. But standing there, seeing people genuinely moved by the art he'd curated, he felt something he'd been chasing his whole career: purpose. The teenager who'd been staring at the sculpture approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you the curator?" "I am," Jake said. "This is really cool," the kid said, gesturing around the space. "I've been to other galleries and they always feel like they're not for people like me. This feels different. Like it's actually trying to say something real." Jake smiled. That simple comment meant more than any critic's review could. "That's exactly what we're trying to do. Make art accessible. Make it matter." As the evening wound down and the last visitors filtered out, Jake did a final walkthrough of the space. The art looked beautiful under the gallery lights. Each piece told a story. Together, they created something bigger than the sum of their parts. He thought about that night at the gala, about Elena standing at the top of those stairs, about how one moment of courage had rippled out into all of this. She'd owned that room completely, not through aggression or dominance, but through absolute certainty in who she was and what she stood for. Jake turned off most of the lights, leaving just a few spots illuminated. Tomorrow he'd come back and do it all again. Talk to visitors. Answer questions. Make adjustments. Keep building this dream one day at a time. But tonight he let himself feel proud. He'd taken the lessons Elena taught him and created something genuine. He'd stopped waiting for permission and started taking up space. He'd found his voice and learned to trust it. The journey wasn't over. It was really just beginning. But standing in his own gallery, surrounded by art that mattered, Jake finally understood what Elena had been trying to teach him all along. Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through courage, through taking risks even when you're terrified, through staying true to your vision even when it would be easier to compromise. He locked up the gallery and stepped out into